suis Ali Jackson. Bienvenue Groove du jour.
Very long, fruitful career in music from a family of musicians. My father being a very passionate and flamboyant bassist and musician. So I grew up in the music. I've always loved the music. I start at 2. It's been a journey from then. So I'm very grateful to have music very close to me in my life journey. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. I moved to New York after lycée. I studied at the New School for jazz and contemporary music, and I studied composition and performance. I meet so many people very soon, and going to New York, I played with some of the royalty of jazz. And it has a huge impact. That was probably more valuable than going to university, to have the experience of playing with so many profound artists. And, music is only an element of the person. It's an extension of the individual. So those being people like Max Roach and Elvin Jones and Albert Murray and Stanley Crouch and Wynton Marsalis and James Spalding, Harry Sweets Edison, James Moody, Milt Jackson, Cedar Walton. I mean, I could go on and on of all of the great musicians spent time with and learn from, and just to listen or be in the room in a conversation. So those are all important elements of developing an identity and a conception about music. It's interesting because people can become famous, but their fame is not who they are, actually. So very early, I realized that people are just people. They can have a lot of fame, but that's like, marketing and promotion and those things. But the actual person or what makes them special, you get an intimate glimpse on why they are or who they actually are. I remember Willie Nelson, working with Willie Nelson. He's Willie Nelson, but he's just a very earthy, down-to-earth human. And he's very humble. And so those are the people that I always gravitate to, not the big, loud, the loud people, it's the quiet people. And working with Wayne Shorter was very special for me. I mean, he's obviously, both of them are older and, in their journey, are longer. They're far in their journey, but that's actually really powerful as well, because they've seen a lot and they've been in the public for many, many years, but they're just serious about their art and about life, or living life, and what is this thing called life. Those are some of the people. I mean, I worked with Wynton Marsalis for many, many years, so he's more like a brother. So to see all of these people at different stages of their musical journeys and their life, it's always interesting, and it gives you perspective. So playing with each person, or whether they have really big names, or Eric Clapton, or who else, Prince. At the end of the day, they're just artists, and they're just people. So I always try to get the essence of the person in that experience. So. Jazz music comes out of the blues, comes out of folk and work songs and community activity, and to express where you want to be, where you're in a place that you don't want to be. That's the core of it. And it has such deep feeling and expression. So that is ultimately the core of what jazz music is. And we just call it the blues. And when I say the blues is not just a form, like 12 measures. Blues is not just the 1 chord, the 4 chord, the 5 chord, like harmonically. Blues is a platform in which one can express their true deep emotions, and they can be understood and heard in a musical platform where everyone has a place to be able to express what it is that is going on with them. And no two stories or representations are exactly the same. However, they could be based around the same thing, but no, it's like no two people in the world are the same. Not yet, anyway. Not until they start the cloning. But this is what makes jazz music special, and it evolved from that. So it's like if you can't play the blues, you can't play nothing. That's what cats would say, older generation of jazz musicians. It still bolds true today. You know, the blues is the central platform in which you must master to be expressive on a human level, because it doesn't matter how many notes you can play. It doesn't matter how cool or etudes or riffs or lines and licks you can do on your instrument. It only matters what can you say that's sincere, that comes from you. If it's one note, if it's many notes, what are you saying? So I think younger musicians sometimes lose sight of this and what that means. It's like telling a story. If you don't have anything interesting to say or perspective, it's hard to tell a story. And how clever are you to tell the story? That's what makes it interesting. Sometimes it's the storyteller's way of how they tell a story. It could be the same story. That's the beauty of like the great musicians in jazz. So Charlie Parker was great at telling stories. And he had an elaborate way of telling stories on his instrument. One thing for sure is to be simple in what they choose to study in the internet, on YouTube, Spotify, all of these different platforms, music service platforms to access music. The thing with music is very detailed, and to learn a style or to learn a concept, you must be focused on that thing. It's like one thing at a time to master it. And now there's so much access to everything, it's hard to focus on one thing. So I feel people have access and they have knowledge of many things, but they do not master anything. So that's number one. Number two is there's no substitute for playing with people. So even though you have access to a lot of virtual things and technology is available to access many things, it's not the same as playing with people. And I see that younger musicians, they actually struggle with the interaction and the human elements of playing with people. Like if one person is playing a little fast, it's like getting their attention to, hey, slow down, or eye contact, or presence. And it's the practicing of playing with the same people for many, many hours to improve that connection. Because in a band, it's a connection of all of the members of the group playing collective. And if you can't do that, then the music is not going to be good. It's very simple things. but very important. It's a very difficult time. If you stop human interaction, I mean, that's what humanity is about. Humans are social beings. We're social. We connect. We are together. We communicate. We share. We are very social, and music is actually that. It's the embodiment of that. You know, I've seen a handful of virtual streams. I've seen tapestry of people playing in their homes and then sending it to some central place, and the engineers putting things together. It's not the same. It's actually poor. The things I saw, and they're great musicians, but the energy that you get with people playing together is just not the same. You can't capture that. You know, people, even if the technology is better, it's not the same. I just hope that this will be over, and then people will at least, it'll come back to normal. There's responsibilities, right? The responsibility of the musician is to present music that has quality, that tells a story, whether it's of the now, and to bring joy. That is the mission. That is the responsibility of the musician, to bring joy and celebration, tell stories, musical stories, and to celebrate life, to celebrate humanity. And the responsibility for the consumer or the person listening is to actually listen, to be patient, to let the music be absorbed by them, to penetrate, and to be enriched and fulfilled by the music. The biggest challenge in 2020 is there's so much content, and not just music, everywhere. There's so much information. So a challenge I have for our listeners, and the challenge I have for our musicians, is that one time a week, une fois chaque semaine, they listen to an album, one record produced by an artist, 60 minutes, maybe something, 70 minutes, uninterrupted. That's for listeners or music appreciators, and for musicians. One time a week, 1 hour, no phone, no texting, no this or that, or I'm gonna do this, and just listen. 1 hour to take your mind to just focus and to be open in a different way. You can listen to Ornette Coleman, New York Is Now. Without giving any names, I mean, just the people that have strong belief in the work that they do, and that is positive. So they give me inspiration. For doctors that were working on coronavirus or finding treatments that weren't like normal to save people's lives, I'm inspired by that. And for artists, for musicians like Jimmy Cobb, who just passed away, who was still playing gigs at his, at his age. I think he was like 80, in his early 80s. So people that have been playing jazz music or jazz musicians for their entire life or most of their life, that they still do it, and that they're still, working at their craft. Well, it's interesting because it's all about like culture and attitude. In France, you know, it is more of a social country and people are more relaxed, and the emphasis is not on so much capitalism. Now, it doesn't mean that capitalism does not exist. However, you know, you go to a shop and people are relaxed. People take their time, you know, maybe not so much in Paris, but when you move in, if you're in the South, it's just very relaxed. So that culture and attitude, you know, people have déjeuner, you know, midi, 14. And if you miss that, you get a sandwich. If you miss that, you take a cafe. And then people have dinner at, you know, 7 in the night to, or 7:30, you know, when the restaurant's open to maybe 10. And that culture around in Europe, it's like it's around food and around social connection. So it's a more relaxed culture. And the emphasis is not always on how much money do I make? How much, you know, it's always about money. So with the music, people are more relaxed. You don't have it's not the same level of urgency, especially on the jazz scene. In Paris, maybe a little more of urgency. We're playing like any big city because there is something called, you know, constructive competition of people wanting to sound good and be good. But for the most part, it's a more relaxed culture. In the United States, I mean, it's like a mesh of all kinds of cultures, and it's a really big country. So because the country is so big, you have so many like little pockets of subcultures and things. But for the most part, it used to be, it's changing. It has changed. I don't even say everything is always changing, but it has changed. You know, there used to be very high standards on musicianship in New York City, for example, where, you know, if you weren't really good, you wouldn't get called for a job. And then if you were to be respected, you had to play with people that were already respected, like big people names in the music. So in jazz music, if you didn't play in an older guy's band or somebody that was respected, you weren't the next guy. So now the whole music scene, and I mean, I could get more into it. In New York, it's still competitive and people are seriously playing, but there's nowhere to play. So the dynamic has shifted. So you do have people that can't play. You have older musicians, middle-aged musicians, and young musicians. However, they're all competing to play in one club that doesn't really pay. It's like an economics thing around it. So I go back to France now because the economics for musicians in France is different. French musicians have intermittence, which subsidizes their income from an economic, you know, sponsored by the state to give them income for their craft. So what happens is it doesn't become about the quality. It just becomes numbers of playing so many gigs to get income. And then that's a huge difference. And in the States, you just don't have, I don't think many artists are sponsored by, we don't have a program necessarily like that, but people write grants or get funding to organizations that do some kind of programming. And normally a lot of it is around education or music education, arts education, which is completely different. So you have two dynamics of systems that they both don't really work. It is so much. First off, Black people in America they arrived in bondage in 1619. And they have been in bondage ever since. bondage doesn't necessarily mean of chains and shackles. It's bondage in the mind, and bondage, spiritual bondage, economic bondage, social bondage, emotional bondage. I mean, it hurts me to say that. You know, I was born in the 70s, 1970s. And I'm like the first generation after segregation in America. The struggles that you have growing up, it just becomes normal for you. Black people's contribution, I mean, they built the country. They created huge wealth. Why did America grow so fast? Why is America a powerhouse? Well, if you have almost 400 years of free labor and people from agriculture, you're going to grow real fast. I mean, just think about it. And that's basically what happened here. But Black people created a lot of the unique and special culture of the world, whether it's the blues, songs, field hollers, jazz music itself. It's birthed out of the ingenuity and creativity of Black people, primarily. You know, it's not exclusive to Black people. However, they are chief architects, and their voices are the most prominent and uplifting in the art form. Not only them, but the majority are Black Americans. The cooking, the cuisine, the creativity, the ingenuity. It's like all of the roots, from Africa, in a foreign land where you have to be creative to survive. So the resilience of Black people is an example of the human spirit and overcoming, So for all of these beautiful things came at a very serious price. The price of life and the price of your sanity, the price of hope. Yeah, I am hopeful. I'm very happy for the manifestations in the Estados Unidos. It's funny how things happen. George Floyd is just the last person that we could say, we like, man, it's undeniable of the brutality and the injustice. It's just in your face. So many great people that have come before have been subject to this, and it's not documented, so you don't see it. So people are just like, oh yeah, that didn't happen, or we didn't see it, or that's bad. It's just words, a narrative. But when you see it, I mean, what can you say? And I think that the people, and it's not Black people's fight at this point. The fight is for the white people to recognize this. Black people only make up maybe 20% of America. And it's the same in a lot of other places in the world. So in France, they make up of African or indigenous African people or descendants of African people in France is 17% or something like that. I don't know the exact numbers. I don't think it's over 25%. I'm sure. It's the responsibility of the leadership to make sure this does not happen. But for whatever reason, it's still happening. So there is hope. There's always hope. If we don't have hope, then we're not human. The quarantine for coronavirus, I've been working on a cello quartet with drum set. So it's a suite of 6-7 movements, not super long, because that's the difference. That's changing the world. People don't have a long attention spans. So anything over like 4 minutes, people go like, oh, okay, whatever. They start drifting. So like all of the movements are around 4 minutes or less. And they feature different aspects of the story of this pandemic, of introspection, loneliness, happiness for time. Uh, I talk about water because water is always, it's probably the most important element on Earth, you know, in different forms of water, from glaciers to ocean to river to rain. So it tells the story of that, uh, and then hope. Hope is the element, you know. That's all we can be hopeful for. It's like looking forward to something. So there's always disappointment when you have hope, but the thing is, hope will always prevail because something positive can always happen. And that's how I look at it. With all of these crazy things and the way the world is, sometimes things must crash for them to come back better. So I always hope for the best, and I hope that our world will get better and it will improve. And sometimes the pandemic has taught us too, is like doing nothing is doing something. I'm grateful for this time here on the planet, and grateful for all of the beautiful people and artists, musicians, scholars, doctors, and diligent people to share the planet with, and that I hope that everyone can find their place to make the world a better place.